Do you ever wonder how to deal with technology? How many people have that issue? Does that come into your mind? You're like, oh, technology is advancing. Are you stretching or are you raising your arm? Okay, thank you. Well, one person. Do you guys wonder ever how technology connects with new media and what that all is about? Do any of you have any idea what I'm talking about right now? Well, our next guest, you're in for a treat. Our next guest, it's a talk show suddenly. Our next speaker is going to shed light on the idea of development of technology and new media. Now, he is a broadcaster. He's a new media strategist. He is a researcher. His work, he's a nationally syndicated columnist for CBC, where he talks about developments of technology. He owns and operates MetaView Media Management, which focuses on new media and also the strategic use of social media. He's a co-founder of the Academy of the Impossible and an active member of the McLaren McCann's Idea Council. Now, what we're going to find out from Jesse Hirsh, who's about to take the stage, is a look into the future about technology. Because it's ever changing. And he's going to shed a little light on it right now. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the platform, Jesse Hirsh.
I think what Zane was alluding to is the great Vancouverite William Gibson's line about how the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. And I've always been someone who's done my best to disbelieve in the future. I mean, we have so much difficulty being in the present that to even imagine what the future would be is a little problematic. But the nature of literacy is not everyone experiences technology in the same way. Not everyone uses technology in the same way. Now, I used to derive great pleasure from standing up in front of an audience and declaring that the internet did not exist, that it was a distraction, it was a sleight of hand, so that you wouldn't see the real big change, the transformation our society's going through. It's kind of ludicrous for me to even try, now that the ubiquity of the internet means that most of you will probably check it within the time I'm speaking here in front of you. But rather now, I like to describe the internet as a great big learning curve. And the higher you can get on that learning curve, the greater your status in society. Now, part of it, a mountain climbing friend of mine gave me that analogy, as he was high up on a mountain and he realized he was experiencing euphoria. That to actually absorb all the information, to see that landscape, that vista, actually gives you a sense of being physically, mentally high, because you're crunching all that information simultaneously. Now, I'm the type of person who's very intellectually curious. And what attracted me to the internet is there's no finish line. There's nobody who could stand up on a stage and say, I figured it all out, I'm done. It really is a dynamic body of knowledge that every day is changing. So that idea of the learning curve is really your ability to learn on the fly, to kind of embrace lifelong learning as the new norm. But I want to come back to that idea that the internet is a distraction, that it's a sleight of hand. Because it's interesting, over the course of this morning's festivities, I'm actually in the afternoon right now, given time travel and time zone changes. The idea of leadership, I think, is very coherent and cogent. And in fact, what I like to argue is that the internet, is changing our relationship with authority. And I was kind of irked a little by Ian's slight of Twitter. Because I actually think Twitter is the most valuable intelligence tool available today. And granted, there are lots of people who turn it on and they get cacophony. They see what people are eating for lunch, what socks they're wearing. But metaphorically, it represents this idea of signal to noise. That all media today, whether television, radio, internet, you come home from work, you turn it on, you're going to get noise. The onus is on you to tune in your program, to tune in your show, or in the case of Twitter, to tune in the new authorities, the new people who you will turn to for your information, for your entertainment, for how you understand the world. Now, Ian's partially right that a lot of those authorities are going to be your traditional mainstream media, but they don't have to be. And in fact, what I argue is that the notion of authority in our society is changing. What used to be the institutional authority is now the cognitive authority. Now, an institutional authority, that's an obvious one. That's your president, your vice president, your minister, your executive director. And 20 years ago, they were the only people who would appear on CBC radio. They were the only people who would be quoted in the Globe and Mail because you had to have institutional authority to have a real voice in our society. Now, much to Ian's lament, any idiot with a Twitter account will talk to Rick in the morning on the early edition, or perhaps appear on the National in the evening. And that is because anyone can provide a signal. Anyone can be a cognitive authority and enter into that public discourse and offer their own perspective of the world. And if they build an audience, well, that in and of itself is going to give them a type of social power. Now, often I like to argue that this is translated to mean that celebrities have become our new aristocracy. That part of the reason they command this kind of social power is that they wield the scarce resource of our economy, which is attention. Anyone who can command attention is able to translate that into a social power, and for most of you, that scarcity is time. As Sweet Brown on the internet has often said, no one's got time for that. And certainly that's true of learning technology and getting onto that literacy curve. So for me, in doing my job as a technology journalist, all I need to do is turn to Twitter. I follow the top researchers in sociology and computer science and security research. I follow some of the top executives, some of the top social scientists, some of the top activists. So that all I have to do at any time is turn on that noise, find my signal, and all of a sudden I feel like I have more power than the KGB when it comes to understanding exactly what's happening in society. But on my part, that takes a high level of literacy, of not only the traditional sense of literacy, of reading and writing, but in particular pattern recognition, of being able to understand what's relevant and what's not relevant. Now, this applies to all sectors, all parts of our society, but perhaps the most immediate, the most damaging, the untold story that's happening in this country is our healthcare system. Because what if I were to tell you that we've already got a two-tier healthcare system, and it's not public versus private, it's literate versus illiterate. Because heaven forbid any of you become really ill or one of your loved ones does, you better believe that the literacy of your health professional is going to have a direct impact on the level of care you receive. Now, this isn't just the issue of e-health and knowing electronic health records. This is having access to continuing medical education, of being able to know what the latest treatments are, what the latest methods are, of being able to take whatever information is coming from the patient, which used to be, oh, my tummy hurts, or maybe you'd get a blood test twice a year. Myself, being the hypochondriac that I am, I actually bought this device called a Scanadu Scout. It's kind of a tricorder out of the Star Trek fame, developed out of the NASA Ames Research Center, and it can do 15 different diagnostics and human vital signs, which they encourage you to do 10 times a day. So when I show up at my annual physical, in addition to just anecdotally describing how I am, I'm going to have a sea of data of all of my health over the course of the year. And I'm going to turn to my doctor and I'm going to say, hey, can you handle this data? Now, I'm the type of person in which my general practitioner, my family doctor can. But what of all the doctors who can't? What if the more and more this technology outpaces, whether it's your personal physician or the healthcare system as a whole? And as an aside, for those of you who are interested in Googling keywords, this is what's called the quantified self. That if we can measure our own data, get a sense of our own data, that will empower us to really be a much better patient, a much healthier human being. So back to this notion of authority, you'd start to understand that sometimes it's not just a cognitive authority, it's data that has authority. That often data speaks for us. Now, it's interesting, Bruce was talking about the rapid rise of social media, how 10 years ago Facebook didn't exist. Well, what if I were to argue to you, and here I'll preface it with the disclaimer that what I'm about to say I do not believe in, do not want to see happen, but I'll share with you in the interest of empiricism and the fact that I actually think it's happening. What if a Facebook account is mandatory? What if you have to have a Facebook account in order to be a meaningful member of society? Now, just to repeat myself, I hope that's not the case. To all of you who don't have Facebook accounts, I say more power to you, but I'll come back to that. But if you're a young person, let's say you're going to school in Manhattan and you'd like to get an apartment, well, there's no way you can do that without giving the landlord your Facebook account, because they want to get a sense as to whether you're trustworthy, maybe who your parents are, who your friends are. Of course, let's scale that up a bit. If you'd like to get any type of credit instrument from a bank in the US, we're talking line of credit, student loan, car loan, there too, you got to give up your Facebook account, because they've decided that credit status is social, that if all of your friends think it's totally cool not to pay back that loan, chances are you might miss a few payments. Versus if all your friends feel that debt repayment is sacred, well, you'll never miss any payment whatsoever. Now, that's on a more substantive level. On a superficial level, services like Spotify base their entire business model around having access to your Facebook account. So granted, I'm not one to say you should post naked pictures. That's Zane's job to encourage. But maybe having a Facebook account, just like having a credit card, just like having a driver's license, is one of those social costs of being part of society. Now, I earlier mentioned more power to all of you who don't have a Facebook account. Quick show of hands, how many people here are unaware of their Facebook account? A few hands. Did you know that even if you don't have a Facebook account, you have a Facebook account? Turns out it was revealed earlier this year that while Facebook has approximately 1.2 billion consensual users, there's actually close to 4 billion users that exist in a parallel social network that Facebook has created based on the address books of all the users who have uploaded them. So let us pretend for a moment that you're not a Facebook user, but your spouse is. Your spouse signs up to Facebook, uploads their address book to see which of their friends are already there, and lo and behold, your email address is in that address book too. Then your cousin does the same thing, your coworker does the same thing, and all of a sudden, Facebook's got data points for your email address, even though you've never been to the site whatsoever. So it's almost as if social media is not the right word. That's why I like the word intelligence, because it really speaks both to the KGB-esque apparatchiks who are kind of running out of Silicon Valley, but it also speaks to your personal question of how are you managing your intelligence? Where are your intelligence sources coming from? And are you thinking in the context of collaborative intelligence? Now, I mentioned healthcare as one particular sector in which this is disruptive. Another area that was in the news this morning are bitcoins. Now, I'm the type of internet researcher who, going back to the Napster days, even before the Napster days, we would all talk about decentralization and how every sector would have its peer-to-peer moment when that central authority would all of a sudden lose that institutional power and a new authority would start emerging. In this case, it's bitcoins. Now, I personally have been studying bitcoins now for over 2 years, and I can honestly tell you I have very little clue as to what's going on. It's what fascinates me. It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle, wrapped in some weird, crazy software that nobody knows who wrote it. So bitcoins are a currency. Right now, they're the leading currency to represent the internet. So, for example, we here in Canada take for granted that the nation state, Canada, is a byproduct of the printed page. The Constitution, the rule of law, it's the same for all of us. Doesn't matter which part of the country you're in. The world that's created by this supercomputer in my pocket, which I struggle to get out without dropping actual cash, does not give that same level of objectivity. I mean, think about it. Everyone uses their smartphone in a unique way. Everyone has their own background image on their desktop. There is no shared text. And this translates into a number of different cultural biases. Number one, nobody goes on the internet to find someone who disagrees with them. Right? No one goes on the internet to find someone who will pierce their worldview. We seek similarity. Right? If you think about this in scientific terms, there is no hypothesis. You start with a thesis, and you go out on the internet to find supporting evidence to make it so. Now, part of this, as an aside, is the value of what we're doing right now. that shared reality becomes a scarcity. Most people, when they're on the SkyTrain or the Canada Line, they're plugged in. Either they got their own personal soundtrack, maybe they got their own personal screen. Very rarely do we sit together and think and talk. And that's personally why I think the event management business is booming, but I digress. The issue still comes down to there is no newscast we all watch. There is no newspaper we all watch. Instead, there's Google. And what does Google demonstrate as the basis of their business model? I argue anticipation. That Google wants to anticipate what you need before you even know you need it. The best example is the search engine. You start typing into the search engine, Google automatically guesses. Well, here's another crazy thing, set of keywords to throw into Google: ambient commerce. Ambient commerce is this holy grail that Amazon, eBay, and Google are actively pursuing, and I'll very briefly describe to you Google's attempts. In San Francisco, they've started a service called Google Shopping Express. It's like a search engine. You go in, you take a product like toilet paper, you say, okay, I want toilet paper, I want it in 60 minutes, and I want it to have environmental considerations because I feel that way, and yet I also want it to be soft and cheap. Put in the criteria. Google sends off one of their human beings who sources all the retailers in your area. They find the toilet paper that matches your criteria, and they deliver it right to your door. Now, I mentioned human being only because Google has these automated cars, so I suspect a human being may be a temporary part of that equation. But the idea is you get same-day delivery of a basic product that Google doesn't even sell. They just source it. You do that 4, you do that 5, you do that 6 times. All of a sudden, Google can anticipate when you need toilet paper. So you don't have to actually turn to your spouse and you go, honey, we need toilet paper. Lo and behold, ding dong, it arrives at the door. Now, part of the reason Google is doing this is they're scared of Amazon. Because Amazon is selling everything to everybody at the cheapest price, and that's a mountain of data that Amazon's able to collect to understand what people are going to buy before they know how to buy it. So ambient commerce is Google's way of trying to catch up. So all of a sudden you get a sense that, on the internet, economics works a little differently. I mean, take Facebook, take Twitter. These are companies that didn't even have business models, that still arguably are barely turning a profit, but they have attention. And through that attention, they're able to have authority. So let us come back to Bitcoins, these leading candidate for the internet's currency. Canada, byproduct of the nation state, we have a dollar. When people want to evaluate Canada around the world, usually they do so by the strength of our dollar. Now, the United States, the European Union, they have their own currencies. And as we all know, they've had a little bit of political instability. Well, what if instead of investing your equity, your capital in US dollars or in euros, what if you could invest in the internet? What if you could take that money and say, I want to bet on the future? Because I have no idea what's going to happen to America. I got no idea what's going to happen in Europe, but I know the internet's going to be around. I know that people are still going to be watching cat videos and are still going to be sharing photos. So if I could invest in that currency, wouldn't that be a great idea? Now, granted, that sounds a little ludicrous to me. I hope it sounds a little ludicrous to you. But enough people believe that, it creates value. So Bitcoin is one of hundreds that are competing to be this. The only reason Bitcoin is different from the others is A, belief. I remember 2 years ago when I started studying it, a Bitcoin was worth about 25 cents. Last time I checked, a Bitcoin is now worth $200. Because someone believes it is, kind of like a shared hallucination. But how many of you have tried to transfer money internationally? Even from a business perspective, try to transfer money in Canada electronically. It's very difficult. Bitcoin makes it secure, instantaneous, and really, really easy. So it's an example of a technology that, someone asked earlier, what is Bitcoin? Well, allow me to try to answer that question completely differently. Bitcoin is the world's first autonomous corporation. Has no board of directors, has no executives. We don't even know who started it. And yet, it now has over $2.5 billion in value, and there are tens of thousands of people around the world doing its work in reward for these things called Bitcoins that other people have decided are valued. I mean, I say this and I have to step back and kind of wonder about how absurd it is. That's kind of one of the reasons why Bitcoin is such a mystery to me. But yet, what are Canadian Tire dollars? What are air miles? What are Aeroplan? I mean, we've been getting into this idea of currency for a while via loyalty marketing. What makes Bitcoin value is anything can be traded in it. And the day in which you can cash in your air miles or your Aeroplan points or your Shoppers Optimum points into Bitcoins, that's when it truly will be the internet's currency. So a lot of this comes down to the issue of literacy and thinking of your brain as a kind of muscle that you need to exercise on a regular basis. Now, coming back to Twitter, I love Twitter because it's a great big gym in which my peers and colleagues, we work together. We never talk about what we eat. Unless we work in fashion, we never talk about our socks. We focus exclusively on signal and helping each other be smarter. And inadvertently, that makes us all authorities. Because rather than talk about who I am or what I'm interested in, I talk about the ideas that I'm interested in. I talk about the ideas that are of interest to other people. And that, in and of itself, gives me authority and allows people to trust me in an open environment in which anyone can call you a name, anyone can make a joke, and where Ian might be a little intimidated by that, I actually see that as really exciting because it gets back down to that issue of diversity of perspective. That on the internet, if you get past that filter bubble, if you don't look for that reinforcement, you can find the world's knowledge and intelligence at your fingertips. Thank you very much.
Move them over to the center, right there. Yeah. Okay, so now you've kind of stressed me out. First, okay, so this is my first initial reaction to your talk, is that how many of you are familiar with the movie Terminator 2? Do you guys remember that? Skynet taking over everything? That's what I was thinking when you were talking about the Bitcoin. First, when I picture a Bitcoin, I see the coin from Super Mario. And then, so clearly I'm like a child of the 80s, early 90s. But so Super Mario Bitcoin, and then I just think of this autonomous, like this world that's happening. And then we're all in these pods and we're all separated. Now it's turning into the Matrix. And now I'm just wondering, is this a good thing? When Bruce talked about 10 years ago that social media didn't exist and it kind of disrupted everything, the business culture, the media culture that Ian referred to. In your opinion, because I know we could sit here and be like, there's no right or wrong, it just is, but in your opinion...
There's always a right or wrong, absolutely.
What do you think, the direction that we're going in, is this good? Is this dangerous? What are your thoughts?
It's both. It's very good. As individuals, we've never had access to more knowledge. We have at our fingertips the types of things that people fought holy wars over in terms of finding the truth. So I think there's incredible empowerment, but it goes back to your point about breathing. Most people are so afraid of the technology that they don't realize how exciting it is and the opportunity for that kind of empowerment. So I always find, am I an optimist? Am I a pessimist? I'm a surrealist. These are weird times to live in. And I think that makes it exciting, but the problem is people's relationship to learning. There's a lot of people who just say, I'm tired, I don't want to learn. Versus there's people who say, I'm so excited to learn today. What is the new thing that I can feed my brain? And to go to Bruce's point, those are the people who are advancing in their careers regardless of other motivators, because people find that lifelong learning infectious. They find that passion infectious. So I am, for the most part, thinking this is a good thing. The question is, are we open-minded enough to engage in that level of learning? And that's where universality starts to dissolve. And you get this idea of a digital divide. That it's not about just plain access, it's what you do with it. If all you do is like fetch about your feelings all day on Twitter, no, you're not going to get much empowerment from that. But if you actually talk about what motivates you, what you're passionate about, or even not say anything at all, but connect to others who do, then you're going to find a very easy and accessible empowerment.
And how do you suggest that we handle this? Like, Guy Kawasaki and Pamela Slim, who just wrote the book, The Body of Work, they made fun of me when I explained to them how I use Twitter. And perhaps if you have a suggestion how I can use this more appropriately, is that I go to Twitter and I have all these people that I follow, and I feel obliged and compelled to read everything. And then when it says load more tweets, I load more tweets. And I go back and I go back and I favorite a bunch of stuff. And then I never go back and read the stuff because I'm overloaded with a bunch of information. Okay, first of all, that's crazy talk, but how do you handle that? But furthermore, how can we handle all the information that keeps coming in because it'll never stop and there's so much out there, especially if we want to broaden our horizons.
Well, it only increases. I mean,
How do you rein it in?
it's the notion of literacy as pattern recognition. No one expects you to read it all. And in fact, as you start identifying authorities in your sector, you'll pay more attention to them. Because you're like, Zane always posts good stuff. I know if I sort of keep an eye for his avatar, if I keep an eye for his tweets, I'll always be rewarded. And I personally never look at the main Twitter stream. So I build lists. I build lists based on subject matter. I build lists based on geography. So that way I'm always segmenting. I'm always organizing this intelligence. So like dossiers, it's available to me. I mean, I follow upwards of 1,700 people. There's no way I'd be able to read all of that. But through a certain osmosis, it exposes me to new ideas. I make an effort to follow people who I would otherwise disagree with so that they might expand my view of the world, especially in my area, i.e. technology. So I'm constantly learning new things. But that's the point of surfing. No one actually expects you to drink the water. If anything, you keep your head, you keep your body above water, and you just find whatever currents, find whatever waves are going. And it takes time, and that time is more enjoyable, more productive if you're having fun at the same time.
Going with the flow. So then when...
And it's funny, I almost want to add to that. I know a lot of people, especially the senior executives I work at, who they're all looking at retirement. They're all looking at the exit door. And I like to joke to them, by the way, the baby boom will be the first cyborg generation. I mean, granted, there are issues of health and longevity, but don't be surprised if you live to 180. I mean, Ray Kurzweil, the senior vice president of R&D at Google, used to say that anyone who lives until 2020 will live forever because artificial intelligence, genetic medicine, I don't believe him. And he's since revised that to 2030.
Oh, okay.
But the point is, it doesn't matter what your age is, retirement may not be as soon as you think. And even if you're retired, if you keep your brain going, your body follows. So to actually embrace learning, to embrace ideas, to embrace knowledge is the secret to longevity. So I think a lot of people where they're thinking, I can get out before this stuff hits. No, on the contrary, be that early adopter. And I mean, Ian was joking about being teased by people that are younger. It's a point of pride. If you can actually engage in that level and show the younger people that maybe they don't have a monopoly on technological comprehension, that's very powerful and reinforces your own authority.
So then what do we need to do if it is now not a sprint, but rather a marathon? How can we shift our thinking so we can handle that, so we're in it and successful for the long run?
I mean, the cliche is with a little help from your friends. I mean, the media is designed to be collaborative. It's designed around teamwork. We're all individuals with our own ideas, but I often like to joke that the secret of my technical power, and like you, I went to university in science and was quickly attracted to other areas, was teamwork. And I've had this chat room that I've been in now for 20 years. It started in IRC, it's moved to Skype, and we're just all these nerds who anytime a new technology comes out, we all together kind of put our heads around it. So in the enterprise, I talk about the idea of a nerd council. That to have a group of nerds and non-nerds who talk about nerd stuff. What used to happen at the water cooler, but now we're kind of isolated by our screen. So to actually create an environment which there's no stupid questions, in which people can really wrap their heads around it, it allows the individual to feel like they have help. But at the same time, it actually creates an infrastructure in which the individual excels because they go back to their family, they tell them what they've learned, they go to their community, they take it to their hockey house league. I mean, we all want to look like we know something, and technology is actually the most accessible knowledge. So to create those types of collaborative environments, which you learn about it and then share that knowledge, is a really easy way to not only stay above water, but actually be able to make waves and get into the type of innovation that Bruce was talking about.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing these ideas. Blowing my mind. I appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, Jesse Hirsh.